The sun was a judgment, a great bleeding eye in the west that bled crimson and gold across the endless prairie. It offered no warmth, only a final, glaring light by which to see the end of the line. And this, Ilara knew, was the end. Her legs, scratched and trembling, gave out. She sank to the dry, cracked earth, the grit biting into her bare feet. Her back found the rough, unyielding support of a large, sun-warmed boulder. It was the first solid thing she had felt in days. She didn't look at the man, but she could feel him, a shadow falling over her, blocking the last of the sun. She had heard him for the last mile, the steady, relentless gait of his horse. Not the frantic, panicked chase of Braxton's other men, but something measured, inevitable, like a clock ticking down. He had been tracking her for 3 days, ever since her horse lamed and she'd been forced to continue on foot. 3 days of stealing through arroyos, hiding in thickets of sagebrush, her tattered silk dress, a cruel joke, the one she'd been wearing the night she fled, shredding with every step. Now, he was here. He had found her. She heard the soft creak of leather as he dismounted, the jingle of a spur, the heavy measured footsteps on the gravel. He stopped a few feet from her. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, on the place where the sky met the grass, the place she would never reach. She waited for the rough hand on her arm, the rope, the curses. She waited to be dragged back to Braxton, to the suffocating opulence of his ranch and the cold, cruel possessiveness of his hands. Instead, there was only silence, broken by the tired snort of his horse. "You ran hard." His voice was not what she expected. It was low and rough, but not cruel. It was tired as she felt. She finally turned her head, looking up. He was a tall man, his face obscured by the shadow of his hat brim and the glare of the setting sun behind him. He wore a simple denim shirt, jeans, and a large, unadorned belt buckle. His hand rested on the boulder beside her head, but it wasn't a threat. It was a posture of rest. He was leaning, catching his own breath. He had tracked a human being across 50 miles of hard country, and he looked at her not with triumph or anger, but with a profound, unsettling weariness. "Water?" he asked. She stared, uncomprehending. He unhooked a canteen from his saddle and tossed it. It landed softly in her lap, the weight of it shocking. Her hands, scraped and raw, fumbled with the cap. She lifted it to her lips and drank, the water tasting of metal and dust and life. She drank until she coughed, the water spilling down her chin and onto the tattered silk. He watched her, his expression unreadable in the growing dusk. "I'm Jonah," he said. "I'm guessing you're Ilara." Of course he knew her name. He was a bounty hunter, Braxton's hound. She said nothing, just clutched the canteen to her chest. "He wants you back," Jonah said, stating the obvious. "Figured as much." "I won't go," she whispered, the words a dry rasp. Jonah gave a short, mirthless huff. "Don't much care what you want. The job's to bring you in." He turned away from her and began to unsaddle his horse, a big roan gelding that immediately lowered its head to lip at the sparse grass. Ilara watched, her mind reeling. He wasn't tying her up. He wasn't dragging her to the horse. He was making camp. What are you doing?" "It's dark," he said, pulling his bedroll from the saddle. "Horses is tired. I'm tired. You ain't in any shape to run. We'll rest. We ride back at dawn." He said it with such finality, such simple, unadorned fact, that she couldn't argue. He had her. The chase was over. He was so confident in her defeat that he didn't even need to restrain her. And the most terrible part? He was right. She couldn't move another step. She leaned her head back against the rock, closed her eyes, and let the first real tears of her escape begin to fall. The cold woke her. The prairie, so punishingly hot under the sun, became a freezing, wind-swept ocean at night. She was shaking so violently her teeth ached. She opened her eyes. The world was pitch black, the stars a cold, indifferent glitter. Then she saw it. A few yards away, a small fire crackled. Jonah sat on the other side of it, his back to his saddle. He was staring into the flames, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. He hadn't built the fire for her, she knew. He'd built it for himself, for the coffee. But the heat rolled off it in small, life-saving waves. She pulled her legs in, trying to curl into a ball, but the tattered dress was useless. "Got a blanket in my roll," he said, not looking up from the fire. "By the saddle. Use it if you want." Warily, she pushed herself to her feet. Every muscle screamed. She limped over to his saddle, her bare feet protesting the cold, rocky ground. She found the bedroll and pulled the thick wool blanket free. She hesitated, expecting a trick, but he just sat there. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, the simple warmth and almost painful luxury. She sank back down, huddling closer to the fire opposite him. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the pop of the greasewood and the soft shuffling of the horse. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice stronger. "Why what? Why are you being kind? You're taking me back. Why not just tie me up and be done with it?" Jonah took a long sip of his coffee. He seemed to be thinking, or perhaps he just didn't want to answer. "Man hires me to find a stolen horse. I find the horse," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Man hires me to find a runaway wife. I find the wife. It's a job. The job ain't to be cruel. It's just to finish." "You don't know him," she whispered, staring into the flames. "You don't know what he's like." "I know he's rich," Jonah said. "I know he's powerful. And I know he paid half in advance. That's all I need to know." "He's a monster," Alara said, the word raw. "He doesn't want a wife. He wants a thing, a pretty bird for his cage. The night I ran, he'd just come back from a trip. He'd ripped the dress of one of the serving girls right in the dining hall just because she spilled some wine. He laughed when she cried. She looked at her own tattered dress. This was the dress I was wearing when I climbed out the window. He bought it for me. I think he wanted me to feel like I was his property, even when I was running." Jonah was quiet. He set his cup down and picked up a stick, poking at the embers. "I had a sister," he said, so quietly Alara almost didn't hear him. "Younger. Got married off to a man back in Missouri, a banker, big, important man. Sent letters for a year, all sounding happy. Then they stopped. I rode out to see her, found her, small, quiet, found bruises on her arms, shape of a man's hand. I asked her to leave with me. She wouldn't. Said it was her duty. Said he'd find her. She died that winter. Pneumonia, the doctor said. But she just gave up. Let herself go." He snapped the stick in two and tossed the pieces into the fire. "I see a lot of things in this job, ma'am. A lot of bad men. A lot of scared people. I learned a long time ago not to get involved. I just do the job. I take the money. I move on." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers across the flames. In the flickering light, she saw his face clearly for the first time. He was younger than his voice, his face lined with sun and dust. But his eyes were clear, and they held a deep, profound conflict. "He'll kill me," Elara said, not for effect, but as a simple, cold statement of fact. "Maybe not quickly, but he will." Jonah looked at her, at the raw, bloody scrapes on her feet, the dark circles under her eyes, the thin silk dress hanging in rags. He looked at her, and he saw his sister. He cursed, low and soft. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice suddenly harsh. "We'll talk in the morning." He stood up and walked away from the fire, disappearing into the darkness to check on his horse. Elara watched him go, a tiny, impossible spark of hope igniting in her chest. Dawn came not as a light, but as a slow, gray draining of the darkness. The world resolved itself into pale, cold shapes. Elara woke, stiff and sore, the blanket still clutched around her. The fire was a circle of white ash. Jonah was already up, packing his gear. His movements were efficient, economical. He had resaddled the roan. Elara's heart sank. He was going to take her back. The man by the fire last night, the man who spoke of his sister, was gone. This was the bounty hunter. He finished his work and walked over to her. He didn't offer her food. He just stood, looking down. "So," he said, his voice flat, "I see it. You got two choices." Elara stared at him, saying nothing. "One," he continued, "you ride back with me. I tie you to the saddle. I hand you over to Braxton. I collect my money. You go back to whatever it is you had." He paused. "Two, I got an old mule I use as a pack animal. He's slow, but he's steady. I give you the mule, a canteen, and half the jerky I got. I ride back to Braxton, tell him I lost your trail in the high rocks, tell him you probably died. He's a proud man. He'll want to believe that more than he'll want to believe you got away. He'll be angry, but he'll have no trail to follow." Elara's breath caught. You'd do that?" "I'd be out half my pay," Jonah said, shrugging, "and Braxton will just send someone else. Harder men than me, men who won't give you a choice. You'll be running for the rest of your life, and it'll be a short one." She looked at the ground, the brief spark of hope from last night turning to ash. It wasn't a choice. It was just two different ways to die. "There's a third option," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. Jonah's eyebrows raised. "Oh? You don't know Braxton. You just know his money. He's not just a cruel man, he's a thief. He built his entire ranch by rustling, by running off smaller homesteaders, by forging documents. My father was one of his business partners before he died. Braxton inherited my father's holdings. And me." "Get to the point, ma'am." "Braxton is smart," she said, standing up, the blanket pooling at her feet. "But he's arrogant. He keeps a ledger, a secret one. It details everything, every herd he stole, every bribe he paid, every land title he forged. He keeps it in his office, in a safe behind a painting of his own grandfather. He thinks it's his real legacy, his proof of how he built his empire." Jonah was listening now, his full attention on her. "I know the combination," Elara said. Jonah was silent for a long moment. He was no longer a bounty hunter. He was a calculator. Elara could see his mind working, weighing the options. "That's a hell of a story," he said. "It's the truth. The U.S. Marshal in Prescott has been trying to build a case against Braxton for years. But no one will testify. They're all too scared. That ledger would ruin him. It would put him away for good." "And what's in this for me?" Jonah asked. "The bounty on Braxton," Elara said, her eyes glittering with a cold, hard light. "The one the marshal's office has had out for 2 years, the one no one can collect for lack of evidence. It's 10 times what Braxton is paying you to retrieve me." Jonah stared at her. The scared, broken woman by the rock was gone. In her place was a woman forged of ice and iron. She wasn't just running from something. She was willing to run toward the monster, to tear him down. "That's a crazy plan," he said, "riding into his ranch? That's not a job. That's suicide." "You tracked me for 3 days on foot," Alara said. "You found me when a dozen of his own men couldn't. You're that good, and I'm that desperate. Together, we could do it. You get your payday, I get my life." Jonah looked east toward the rising sun, the direction of Braxton's ranch. He looked at Alara, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes burning with conviction. He thought of his sister and the years he'd spent just doing the job. This was not a job. This was something else. This was a reckoning. "All right," Jonah said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "This is a bad idea. A real bad idea." He walked to his horse. "But the pay's good." He pulled a pair of worn trousers and a shirt from his saddlebag. "Put these on. You can't ride in a dress, and we're going to need that mule. We'll ride him till he drops." The ride back was a mockery of her escape. Every step the horses took carried her closer to the place she had torn her hands and bloodied her feet to flee. But this time, the fear was different. It was no longer the panicked, hunted terror of a rabbit. It was a cold, sharp-edged tool. She rode the mule, Jonah's roan gelding Dusty tethered behind. Jonah himself was on foot, leading them, his eyes constantly scanning, reading the land. He was a different man. He was no longer the weary bounty hunter. He was a predator. He moved with a silent, fluid grace, his senses tuned to the world around them. He pointed out the tracks of Braxton's patrols, circles of men sweeping the prairie, and he led her around them, through canyons and dry riverbeds he seemed to know by instinct. "How do you know this land so well?" she asked, her voice low, as they rested in the shade of a rock overhang. "Tracked a band of Apache raiders through here 2 years back," he said, cleaning his rifle. "For the army. Braxton's ranch. It's built on land they considered sacred. That's why he has so much trouble. He didn't just buy a ranch, he bought a war. He taught her. He showed her how to load his spare revolver, how to check the action. He made her fire it into a creek bed until her hand was steady. You won't be a bystander, Alara. You're in this. You get us in. I get us out." She, in turn, guided him. As they neared the massive, sprawling borders of the ranch, she became the leader. She knew the blind spots. She knew the patrol routes, the times of the changing guard. She knew which foreman was lazy, which hands were heavy drinkers. "The south fence," she said, as they lay on a ridge overlooking the ranch house in the distance. It was a fortress, a massive adobe structure with a high wall. By the creek. The guards there, they play cards from midnight till 2. They leave a 20-yard gap. "That's our door," Jonah murmured. They waited for a moonless night. It was a 2-day wait, a tense, silent vigil where they lived on jerky and cold water, speaking only in whispers. The proximity to Braxton was a physical weight, pressing down on Alara. She barely slept. She saw Jonah watching her, his expression unreadable. The night came, black, starless, and heavy. They left the horses and the mule a mile out, hidden in a deep arroyo. They moved on foot, 2 shadows in a vast, dark world. They reached the south fence. As Alara had promised, there was no one. They could hear the low murmur of voices and the occasional laugh from a guard shack 50 yards away. They slipped through the gap into the serpent's den. The ranch yard was a maze of stables, bunkhouses, and workshops. Jonah moved first, a ghost flitting from shadow to shadow. Elara followed, her heart a drum against her ribs. She kept her hand on the butt of the revolver Jonah had given her. They reached the main house, a sprawling dark monument to Braxton's ego. "How?" Jonah whispered, pointing at the locked oaken door. "He never uses the front," Elara whispered back. "He's too important." She led him around the side to a small, unassuming door half hidden by overgrown rose bushes. The servant's entrance? "He keeps it unlocked. He likes to visit the staff quarters." Unannounced. Jonah's hand rested on his pistol. "After you." She pushed the door. It opened with a soft, oiled snick. They were inside. The house was silent, sleeping, but it was a heavy, watchful silence. Elara could smell the familiar sense of expensive cigar smoke, beeswax, and a faint, cloying perfume. It was the smell of her prison. She led him through the dark kitchen, down a long, carpeted hallway. They were in the heart of the beast. "This way." The office. They reached the end of the hall. Two massive, carved wooden doors. Braxton's office. Jonah put his hand on the knob. He looked at her. She nodded. He turned it. Locked. "Of course," he muttered. He pulled a set of thin metal tools from his pocket. "No," Elara whispered. "Wait." She pointed to a potted plant beside the door. "He's arrogant." She reached deep into the soil and pulled out a small brass key. Jonah stared at her, then at the key. A slow smile touched his lips. "You're full of surprises." He unlocked the door. They slipped inside, closing it softly behind them. The room was dark, but the curtains were open, and the faint starlight gave the furniture shape. A massive desk, a gun rack, and on the far wall, a huge looming portrait of a stern, bearded man. "That's him," Elara breathed. "Grandfather Braxton." Jonah moved to the painting. He felt along the heavy gilt frame. "No hinges. It doesn't swing." "It's the painting itself," Elara said, her voice shaking. She walked up to it, her hand trembling as she touched the canvas. "He told me once when he was drunk." He was so proud of it. She pushed on the old man's left eye. A loud mechanical clunk echoed in the silent room. The entire painting shifted, then swung outward, revealing a black, square-jawed safe. Jonah let out a low whistle. He ran his fingers over the dial. This is a problem. I can't crack one of these, not quietly, not fast." "I told you," Elara said. "I know the combination." She stepped up to the safe. "My birthday," she said with bitter irony. "The day he acquired me from my father's estate. 10, 22, 18 inches. She spun the dial. The numbers felt greasy beneath her trembling fingers. Left to 10, right past 10 twice, to 22, left to 18. She pulled the heavy steel handle. The safe hissed open. Inside there were stacks of cash, jewelry boxes, and a single thick leather-bound book. Elara's hand shot out and snatched it. "This is it." "Let's go," Jonah said, already moving to the door. He opened it a crack. The hallway was dark, empty. He motioned her forward. They retraced their steps, through the hall, past the kitchen, to the servants' door. Elara's heart was pounding so hard she was sure it would wake the house. They were almost out. She pushed the door open. "Well, well," a voice drawled. "Look what the cat dragged in." And she brought a friend. A match flared. A lantern was lit, illuminating the face of Braxton himself. He was leaning against the adobe wall, a silk robe on, a heavy dragoon revolver in his hand. Behind him stood two of his guards, rifles leveled. "My dear," Braxton said, his eyes glittering, "did you really think I wouldn't know you were here? That I wouldn't have a key to my own office?" He must have seen the door unlocked or heard the safe. "Jonah, isn't it?" Braxton sneered. "The man I paid to fetch my property. And here you are with my property and my ledger." He held out his other hand. "Give it to me, Alara, and you, Jonah, I'll pay you the other half of your fee in lead." Alara was frozen. This was it. The end. Jonah, however, hadn't moved. He hadn't tensed. He just stood, relaxed. "You're a predictable man, Braxton," Jonah said, his voice calm. "Arrogant. You like to talk." "I like to win," Braxton corrected. "And you like to visit your staff," Jonah said, "even when you have company." Braxton's eyes narrowed. "What?" "The girl," Jonah said, nodding toward the house. "The one you like to visit. The one whose door you leave unlocked." "What about her?" Braxton snarled. "I gave her $50, Jonah said. "Told her to ride to the marshal's office in Prescott the second she heard a gunshot. Told her to tell them Jonah had Braxton but needed help. Sent her out the front gate an hour ago while you were asleep." Braxton's face went pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Jonah asked. He looked at the two guards. "He's paying you to die for him? When the marshal gets here, that ledger," he nodded at the book in Alara's hand, "is going to hang him, and you right along with him for being accessories." The two guards looked at each other, their rifles wavering. "Shoot them!" Braxton screamed, raising his revolver. It was all the time Jonah needed. His gun was in his hand. A single, deafening bang. Braxton's pistol fired into the dirt as he crumpled, clutching his shoulder. The two guards didn't shoot. They dropped their rifles. "We ain't in on this, Marshal, or whoever you are. We're just hired hands." Jonah didn't lower his gun. "Get him," he ordered, nodding at Braxton, who was groaning on the ground. "Tie him up and wait for the marshal." As the sun began to rise, casting a sick gray light over the ranch, Jonah and Alara walked out the south gate. She was still clutching the ledger. He had a fresh horse from Braxton's stable. They reached the arroyo where they'd left the other animals. They didn't stop. They rode east toward the dawn. They rode for an hour in silence. "You knew," Alara finally said. "You knew he'd be waiting." "I knew he was arrogant," Jonah said. "I knew he'd want to catch us himself. And I knew he wouldn't be able to resist a monologue." He glanced at her. "You did good. You got the ledger." "What now?" she asked. "Now, we ride to Prescott. We give this to the marshal. I collect my 10,000, and you'll be free." Alara looked at the man beside her. He was just a bounty hunter, a man who just did the job. But he had saved her twice. He had seen his sister in her, and he had changed his path. "And you, Jonah?" she asked. "What will you do?" He looked at the rising sun, his face unreadable. $10,000. Buys a lot of road, but I don't know. I'm tired of running." He looked at her, a small,